Well, welcome back, folks. Today we're going to continue on with the reassembly of the bottom end of the Suzuki TS50 engine. If you recall in the last video, we put new seals in on the left side, 4 seals. Now we're going to move over to the right side. We have quite a bit of assembly work to do here today. The rotary valve cover, the pinion drive gear right here, the clutch basket, and ultimately we're going to end up somewhere along the line putting in the return spring for the kickstart here. This may take more than one video, I'm not sure. We'll just see how it goes here today. Probably will take more than one, but we'll see. But we're going to start with the rotary valve installation, the rotary valve cover. We've got some seals we've got to work with, but before we get to that, we're going to hop over to the computer a second. I have something I want to share with you regarding the torque settings for this engine as it relates to this side of the engine in particular, and then we'll come back and we'll get started on the reassembly here of the engine. When doing major service work on these engines, it's typically necessary to know and use the factory service specifications for various fasteners found throughout the engine. In the case of the Suzuki TS50, I went through the entire service manual from front to back and was not able to locate much of anything regarding torque settings. The only thing I was able to find over here, I'll show you, is for the flywheel nut in this column and the cylinder head nuts. And those are outside of the scope of this conversation today, and we'll come back to those another time. So the two settings that we're concerned about today are the primary drive nut, primary drive pinion, and the clutch nut. Now the primary drive nut is an M14 standard thread. The industry standard torque settings for that size fastener, that is M14, is 55 pound-feet of torque. The clutch nut is a 16 millimeter standard thread, and the industry standard torque setting is quite a bit higher than the M14. I'm not going to use that or even discuss it in any degree because the shaft that the clutch basket attaches to or bolts onto is a hollow shaft and is used for the clutch push rods to pass through. So being hollow, I didn't think the industry standard setting for that M16 fastener was appropriate. What I did end up doing is digging out my Yamaha PW50 service manual. I have worked on PW50s in the past, and I'll put a picture up here of the front cover of that service manual. The Yamaha PW50 service manual does have all the various torque settings, and given the fact that that engine is very similar in size and design to the TS50, I thought that'd be a good starting point to work from. The Yamaha service manual calls for a 36 pound-feet of torque for the primary drive nut and also 36 pound-feet of torque for the clutch nut. And I'm going to base my service plan on those two numbers. That is my plan you can see here in this lower row. I'm going to use 36 pound-feet for the primary drive nut and 36 for the clutch nut as well. But those are going to be my starting points. When I get into doing the actual torquing, I'll go a little bit by feel as I usually do. I typically torque on these older engines to the low end of the torque standards, and we'll get to all that in just a few minutes. But I did want to share with you how I got to where I did with the engine torque settings, and we'll come back to some of the other specifications at another time. So let's go back over the engine and continue on with the reassembly. Where we're going to begin with this first stage of reassembly is the seal, and this the seal of the cover for the rotary valve. Now here's the rotary valve right here, which will fit over this drive gear right here. This drive gear, I don't know if you can see it right there, does have a notch cut in it that fits over a pin right here that's inserted into the crankshaft. And I haven't pulled any of this apart, by the way. This cover that you can see right here is as it was assembled at the factory. You can take this cover off, and there's a gasket behind there, etc., etc. But I'm obviously not going to do that. I don't think it's necessary. You'll also see right here is the main bearing, the right side main bearing right here. So as I turn this engine over, you can see that main bearing turning in there. This gear, this drive gear right, again, slips over that pin, that notch, and it's a pretty precise fit. See if we can't get this back on like that. Fits up against the inner bearing race. Then the rotary valve will fit on next, and you can see the internal splines here, I think, on the rotary valve that fit over the drive gear. Now there is something to take note of on the rotary valve, and let me move in a little bit closer for you. Hopefully you can see that little mark right there I'm pointing to with the pencil. That little mark has to obviously face out so you can see it, and that mark aligns with that pin that drives that gear. Again, we talked about that pin a moment ago. So when you put this rotor valve on, you align that with that. So that ensures that the timing of the rotor valve as it rotates is correct for the intake cycle of the engine. Now the rotary valve itself, I haven't really done anything with this outside of wipe it down, make sure it's nice and clean. It's nice and straight. There's no damage to it. There typically isn't. This happens to be all metal. Some of them are of fiber. Kawasaki has used, I've run into a lot of fiber type rotor valves on Kawasaki's. But we're going to go ahead and put this in place now. So I'm just going to bring that pin to the top, and then it's just a matter of lining this up like that. I zoomed in here. I don't know if it's enough for you to see, but that mark in the rotary valve is right where I'm pointing to with the pencil, and there's the drive pin for the gear itself, and those two are aligned. Again, that's to ensure correct timing of the rotary valve as it rotates. The next thing we're going to do is replace this seal. Now this really acts as the right side engine seal. It's installed in this cover. I'm going to replace this seal, and I do have a new part from Suzuki right here. And on the back side of this cover, there is a large O-ring, which I also have right here. So we're going to be replacing the seal in this large O-ring. And there's also a bushing on the inside here that you can see. Just set that aside for now. In order to get this bushing, or rather this seal replaced, we're going to have to press it out in some form. Now, my experience has been on this type of an assembly before. These usually are not difficult to get out. You can get at it from both sides. You could use a puller. I don't think I'm going to have to. I think I can probably just push it out either using a very large socket. I found this very large socket that is almost a perfect match for the seal. I'm sure I could drive it out. And in some cases, you can actually push these out with your fingers. Now again, you have to take note of how this seal is installed. And in this case, very typical, it's installed about flush with this edge or this face of this cover. So when I put the new seal in, I'll reinstall it so that it's approximately the same position. Now, do I think that's super critical on this installation? Probably not. You've got a lot of room to work with on the inside here, but I'm going to do my best to get it back level again. Like you can see, I think in the shot right there, it's nice and flush across. And then we'll move on to replacing this O-ring, this large O-ring on the back. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make this real simple. I'm going to try to use my thumbs and just see if I can push this seal out. And if I can't, then we'll come back and we'll use the large socket. And I'm going to try to push it out the way it was put in. I'm sure it was put in from this side in. That'd be my guess. So I'm going to reverse the process. And I haven't had this out before for obvious reasons. I didn't need to. But let's see if we can go ahead and just push this out. And in fact, it is moving. And there's the seal. I'm not surprised by that. It might surprise some of the viewers, but in my experience, that is not uncommon. Here's the new. Here's the old. Now what we're going to do is make sure that this is nice and clean, and it is. There's no reason not to be clean. Again, notice my hands are clean. Everything in my work area is clean. If I was concerned if this was going to be problematic, I could heat this up. If this becomes a challenge to put in, I would heat this up enough to allow this aluminum or alloy cover to expand enough to allow this new seal to go in, but we'll see if we can maybe just get it put in by hand like this. And I got it started, but I'm meeting a little resistance. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a soft-faced hammer. I'm going to see if I can't work this seal down. Let me reposition the camera a bit so you can get a better look at that, what I'm going to do next. So I have a soft-faced hammer. This is plastic. And I think we've got it about done. You can see that there. I'll get this in focus for you. It's nice and level all the way around on both sides. It looks good. So I think we've got that main right side seal installed. Now what we're going to do is take this and get this out. Get a little screwdriver here. This O-ring, and we're going to replace it with this new one. Still available from Suzuki. And that fits like that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little dielectric grease. You've heard me talk about that before. I'm just going to work a little dielectric grease on there. In fact, I think what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pop this out and make sure this is nice and clean. A little something right there. And I'm going to coat this with a little dielectric grease and I'm going to put this back in. I'll do that off camera. Got the O-ring all coated with dielectric grease. I'll just go ahead and put this back in this groove right there. Make sure it's seated all the way around. We've got the cover about ready to reinstall. New right crankshaft seal right here. New O-ring that seals the cover. Rotor valve is installed and the timing is correct based on that pin. We have to reinsert this little bushing right here. It goes like that. And then we can install this cover. Now this cover is keyed, and what I mean by that is you might notice this little cutout right here. That cutout, machine half moon shape, aligns with a half moon shape right here in the lower part of the crank case. And that's actually where a dowel pin will fit in eventually when this right clutch cover is installed. But for now, what we'll do is we'll approximately align this shape here, this cutout, with that one, and we'll just slip the cover over the rotary valve. And this is a fairly precise fit, like that. The only thing that holds this cover on, there's no fasteners, Put the right crankcase cover, again using that dowel pin right here to provide alignment of the rotation of this, so this hole for the carburetor lines up with the intake lower side of the engine. The cover is what holds, the right engine cover is what holds this plate in place. Now what we're going to do is move on to installing the drive pinion right here. Now let me get this out of the package for you here. The drive pinion is a pretty simple arrangement. We have a locking washer right here. This is the original, and you can see where it was bent up. We have the drive pinion itself. There's a hole in it right there that aligns with that locking tab right on the washer. Goes like that so that it can't twist. There's a key. You can see the keyway that's been cut into that gear right there, that drive pinion. And this keyway will fit into the crankshaft. There's obviously a keyway cut in the crankshaft like that. And then of course the nut. Now I did buy a new lock washer. This part is no longer available from Suzuki. You can see the part number I wrote on there. I got it on eBay. They're all over on eBay. I had no trouble getting it. I think it was like $4 or $5 US, something like that. Could I have reused the original? Probably. But I typically don't reuse this kind of a washer. Now when I go to put this keyway in, or this pinion on rather, I should make sure that that hole is facing out right there so that that locking tab can fit in there. Like that. I've already installed the key in the slot in the crankshaft. I'm going to align this drive pinion. Again, I'm going to keep this hole right here facing out because that'll align with that bent over tab in the lock washer. And we've got to align the key here like that with a slot in the pinion and rotate this around so that that slot is facing up, and then I can put the washer in and put the nut on. That. Spin that nut on. Now we're going to go ahead and tighten or torque this nut, 36 foot-pounds. And notice I've got a socket extension put through the connecting rod. I'm not going to use a screwdriver this time like I did to take it apart because the torque is fairly high and I'm afraid I'm going to bend the screwdriver. So I just rigged something up with some tape here to protect the cases and the inside of the connecting rod. It's 25. Let's go up to 30. There's 30. A lot easier if I had someone to help me, but so I got to kind of hold the engine and do all this on my own. There's 30. Let's take it up to 35. I think 35 will be good. Right there. That's 35. There. 35 foot-pounds. And I'm satisfied with that. The specifications is 36. I'm going to leave it at 35. I think we're good. So what we're going to do now, put this back where it belongs here. What we're going to do now is I have to bend one of those tabs on that washer up against the flat of the nut to prevent this from spinning off. So let me get set up for that. And so I got a good quality cold chisel right here. It's pretty sharp on the end. Plus I got some punches. The way you normally would bend these up, and I'm sure the factory used a tool for this, but what I do is I get the cold chisel underneath the washer and start to work it up against one of the flats, and then either I'll use one of my punches here, or you can use a pliers and just flatten it against the flats. Doesn't really make any difference. If you look at the original from the factory right here, you can see they rotated it or bent up the section that's almost the opposite of the tab. So if we rotate, make sure we rotate. There's the tab right there I'm pointing to. You probably can't see it. I'm going to rotate that down to approximately the bottom, like that. And then we're going to take this punch, or this chisel rather, see if we can't get underneath that part of the tab right there and start to work it up. Now if I'd been thinking, and I wasn't, I was focused too much on the video trying to get everything right, I would have pre-bent that tab a little bit. I've done that in the past. In other words, I just start it so it makes it a little easier at this stage. But let's see what we can do here. You can see I got the tab, I think, I hope. You can see I've got it well started, so then I'll just take one of my punches here and see if we can't just flatten it. You don't have to be too aggressive with it. Remember, you're hitting against that shaft and that bearing in there, so all you want to do is just tap it enough to flatten it, like you can see there. I think you can see that. So we now have the rotor valve, the seals, drive pinion, and everything installed on the right side of the motor. I think we're going to move on now and install the Kickstarter return spring, which would be pretty easy to do before we go ahead and get on the clutch back. Here are the components for the Kickstart return spring. It's pretty straightforward and simple assembly. Based on the photos that I took when I disassembled this unit, this part of the spring right here, see there's two different types of bends. The longer bend goes into there's a hole here in this kickstart shaft that eventually will fit into. The shorter bend here will fit into this hole. There's a hole right here in the bottom of the case. I think you can probably see it. So the spring will go on in this orientation. This plate will fit inside of here like this. Again, this is based on the photos and the notes I took when I disassembled the engine. It'll fit something like that. This little plastic piece will be installed after it's on the engine, and then this little circlip right here will be used to secure the whole assembly onto the engine. So I'm going to begin by just simply pre-assembling the unit like that with the ears to the inside. And I'm going to have to work this over this shaft a bit. Like that. And I have to get that spring and use a needle nose, I think, to get that spring into that hole. Doing my best to do this without getting my head in the way. There, like that. And fit the spring up. Like that. So I've got I know you can't necessarily see it, but I got that lower bend in the spring hooked into the engine, into the hole. Now what I have to do is bring this spring around like this, and this part of the spring has to be placed in that hole. Now I've got to twist this part of the spring around and get it into the hole on that shaft. like that. There we go. Everything's settled into place. Now we need to install the retainer ring. Right, you can see here that little snap ring. There's a groove machined about halfway down on this Kickstarter shaft that this circlip will fit into eventually. Then this little plastic piece here will fit down against the face of that snap ring right here. So first I'm going to use my small pair of snap ring pliers and just get this started over the shaft. I got to get it past that spring, and then I can just rotate it around like that and then get a hold of it like this. Take my glasses off a second so I can see what I'm doing. I know my arm's probably in the way, but not much I can do about that. And I think that's pretty close right there. Yeah, okay. That's in the groove now. I know you probably can't see that, but the snap ring is popped into the groove. And then this plastic piece, you notice it's kind of cone shaped. It's tapered. It goes like this up against that snap ring. And with that, we have the Kickstarter return spring reinstalled. I did reference the photos before I started, and this does look exactly like how it was assembled when I began taking it apart. So that's, I think, complete. I did want to get the return spring installed before I go ahead and get into the clutch basket, simply because I wasn't exactly sure if I could get at full access to this spring with the clutch basket on. I probably could, but I thought I'd go ahead and get that spring out of the way, and then I can move on to the clutch basket, which is a little bit involved as well. So I think at this point we're going to call this video a wrap. We've got the rotary valve, the cover, and the drive pinion installed, torqued, and all in place. We've got the return spring from the Kickstarter installed back the way it was originally. So I think we've got those two major elements done. Next video will be installing the clutch basket, including the clutch plates, clutch springs, getting everything put back together in terms of the clutch. I think that will be one video in and of itself. At this point, we're going to call this video a wrap. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.